Hi everyone, welcome back, and we're going to be speaking today about the Safavids, the rise of the Ottomans' major enemy. Before we do, let's just do a basic overview of some of the dates and times that we've covered in the class so far. So we started this class way back in 1074, 1200s or so, basically the Battle of Manzikert, which opened up Anatolia to Turkic invasions. Then there was the Mongol invasion of Anatolia, which pushed Turkic nomads even further to the edges of the Byzantine Empire. And it's probably around 1299 that we see probably the first signs of something called the Ottomans, which were just one of the many principalities out there. But they quickly rose. They took over the city of Bursa. They made Edirne their capital eventually in 1362, and they conquered large portions of the Balkans over the 14th century. Then they're pushed back down by Timur, a guy trying to recreate the conquest of the Mongols. And then they rose back from that setback, reorganized, retook many different places, and ultimately conquered Constantinople. Now, what we'll be talking about today in general is this period between the 1450s and the 1550s, when the Ottoman Empire becomes an empire in its own right. And this is a period that was overseen by three sultans, who I'm just going to mention quickly. One is Sultan Bayezid II, the other Sultan Selim, who kind of doubled the size of the empire but only ruled for 8 years, and his son Sultan Süleyman, probably the most famous sultan, the one who's known as Magnificent in English, or Lawgiver in Turkish, and ruled for 46 years. Now, just a bit of background. Mehmed II, the sultan who conquered Constantinople, who ruled for 30 years, he was a major figure, and he had essentially two sons, Cem Sultan and Bayezid. The two of them, now remember, when the sons take power, they basically have to, only one of them, each has an equal right, but only one of them can inherit the kingdom in a sense, and has to defeat the other. Cem Sultan quickly raised support from different factions of the empire, but it didn't work. Ultimately, he had to flee. He fled first to the Mamluk Empire, that is to Egypt, and then to Italy, where he lived as a sort of hostage. Eventually, as you can see, actually, his portrait was painted in Italy, where he was a sort of forced guest of the papal court until apparently his brother Bayezid essentially paid someone to kill him, possibly in Italy. And that was the end of that. But as always, the idea is that by hosting a possible contender to the throne, that they could release him, or he could eventually go back, reorganize a rebellion, and take power. And that's why these contestants to the throne were always dangerous. The other person, the one who won, is this figure Sultan Bayezid II, depicted here. This isn't his real face, but this is what he was imagined to be by a 17th century Italian artist. He essentially oversaw a few different things during his reign, which was quite long. He kind of pushed back from some of Sultan Mehmed II's extreme policies, for example, seizing private property, ending endowment lands, etc. He went back from those. He gave back rights to people who were alienated by the Sultan Mehmed II's authoritarianism. He kind of re-centralized the empire after a massive moment of expansion. But he also did other interesting things internationally. So, for example, in 1492, the Spanish crown reconquers all of Iberia, or conquers all of Iberia, and in doing so puts an end to 6 centuries of Muslim rule there. One of the first things that they do is expel all the Jews, and eventually they would expel all the Muslims as well, but they forcibly expel all Jews from Iberia. And he basically sees this as a moment to seize upon this sees upon this giant flood of rather skilled immigrants and people with commercial connections and welcomes them into the Ottoman Empire, allows them to settle down, where many of them do, in Istanbul and Salonika, and eventually in different cities across the empire. And this is what starts what's called the Sephardic diaspora across the Mediterranean, but especially in the Ottoman Empire. Sephardic coming from the word Sfarad, which is the Hebrew word for Spain. And he also oversees a new set of hostilities between the Safavids, who would rise in Iran, and the Ottomans, and also ultimately the Portuguese, who were making inways and attacks onto places, the holy spots of Islam, that is Mecca and Medina, which were technically controlled by the Mamluks. So he's in a world in which the international relations are quickly changing, and he doesn't know exactly how to move. And it's at that moment that his son Selim decides to seize the opportunity and essentially overthrew his father, claiming that his father was too much of a softy to direct the empire. Even though he wasn't the preferred heir, he basically is on the frontier with Iran. He's seen the attacks that are coming from there, and he raises support from the Janissaries, from the different parts of the army, goes up through Crimea, marches down across the Black Sea, and comes into Istanbul, where he basically forces his father to abdicate, and then undertakes a massive campaign, as we'll see, in eastern Anatolia and then in the Arab world. He dies, though, very quickly, actually just after 8 years, and he leaves a massively expanded kingdom to his son, Sultan Suleyman. He's probably the most famous sultan, and as we'll see, he codified and elaborated the imperial Ottoman tradition. So whenever people think back of the golden age of the Ottoman Empire, they think back to the time of Sultan Suleyman, not that because he was really that transformational, that he was very important. It's because he becomes associated with a lot of these changes. Just as, for example, in the United States, we might think of Abraham Lincoln as the good old days, or more likely, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is seen as this kind of last ideal architect of the New Deal, of kind of social security nets, etc., and so forth. And as we'll see, he also orchestrated a number of military campaigns, but because he's so completely connected to this idea of order, he's given this name in Turkish called the Kanuni, the lawgiver. And we're going to look at that over the course of this coming week.